Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Capital Connection. I'm Conan Smith. I'm the president and CEO of the Michigan Environmental Council. And we are here to talk about some really exciting progress today in lead prevention. And we have two fantastic former guests back for another round. Representative Rachel Hood, who is not just outstanding environmental lawmaker. She's one of us. Rachel served on the board at the Michigan Environmental Council for many years and ran the West Michigan Environmental Action Council professionally. We are so grateful to have your leadership, Rachel, and to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Always a delight.
And a familiar face with a new name, Tina Wall joins us. You may have known her previously as Tina Reynolds. What happened to your last name?
I eloped on Mackinac Island on the 19th of October. So
a huge congratulations to you for that.
Thank you.
That was really, really fun and such a cute thing when you came into the office and shared that, and we were all like wide-eyed and amazed. So great. Congratulations to you as well. So Representative Hood, you serve on the committee that is destined to determine the fate of environmental health, and you've had a lot of excellent progress there, working across the aisle on lead issues, which I think are finally starting to get some real acknowledgement in the legislature. You know, certainly we all hear the headline breaking news about lead pipe failures in Benton Harbor and elsewhere. And while those headlines are dramatic, what gets lost is that the overwhelming sources of contamination and exposure for children are not actually the lead pipes, not the water. It's all these other places where, whether it's paint in homes or dust in the air, there is so much exposure still that our kids face. And of course, EPA and anyone in the public health field will tell us that there is no amount of exposure to lead that is safe, especially for children. And we find ourselves now in a really exciting place where legislation that you've introduced has gotten its first set of hearings. Can you just jump in and give a little framework, the both of you, Tina and Rachel, about the lay of the land on lead as an issue in the legislature, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the bill package.
Sure. Thank you, Conan. We have been working for years on lead, and I think the Flint crisis finally unlocked some progress. A lot of effort was initiated to address that issue, and the specific issue was a means through which we began educating the legislature as a whole about the negative impacts of lead exposure, particularly in vulnerable communities, and especially in young children between the ages of 0 and 6. So when I came into the legislature in 2018, some work had been done to appropriate funding for a response to Flint. And, some basic changes had happened in the state's laws to address, accountability and clarity of roles, et cetera. But again, we were leaving a lot on the table. I think some of those challenges have been fiscal. We have our legislature has been run by Republicans for several decades, and of course, with a Republican governor in office, we have been working very diligently from their view-shed to reduce state deficits and get the state's economic portfolio into. But in the midst of that, had neglected a lot of public health work that needed to be done around lead. And just to give you some context about why I'm so passionate about this in particular, the city of Grand Rapids and Kent County have been working on getting the lead out in housing, looking at the lead paint dust issue for 25 years. And this single issue has really characterized my entire career, starting out in a neighborhood with aging housing and citizens in that neighborhood whose children were definitely impacted by lead. And in fact, I really believe that there are intergenerational impacts of lead in the city of Grand Rapids. And then after working in the hospitals, and then subsequently for the Environmental Action Council in West Michigan, through all of that, the one thread that has been consistent in my career has been this crisis around lead. So 25 years ago, we were identifying about 1,200 kids a year who were poisoned by lead. We worked to enhance identification and testing among children who were in critical zip codes within the city where we knew there was aging housing and a lot of exposure to lead paint chips and dust. We've reduced that number, but we still have 400 kids a year in the city of Grand Rapids, predominantly in one zip code, 49507, which is consistently the highest number of lead poisoned children across the state. So that's more kids per year than we saw exposed in Flint. This is really problematic. When we look at this across the state, we know that we are not testing enough kids. We're only testing about 14% of the population of children, those children who are on Medicaid or who are in neighborhoods where physicians have begun to be really aggressive about testing because they know that this is an issue that is predominant in the community. But there's a whole population of kids who may be getting exposed who we have not yet identified. And so I think in my time since 2018, I've been working with my colleagues who are passionate about the Filter First legislation and addressing the Flint crisis and helping them to see that there are more crises at play here, providing education and then insight into insight into how we can, as a legislature, address these issues.
Thank you.
I'm really excited about this package because, again, we've been working in this space for a really long time. We've been doing lead education days. We've been talking to policymakers. We've had Flint. We've had Benton Harbor. And this, in my experience in the legislature, has been the first time in 2 decades where we have had a serious hearing in the policy committee on actual legislation. And so I can't thank Representative Hood and the other sponsors of this package enough for finally getting the attention and the actual action, because we've done a lot of talking. And the department has made a lot of progress on this issue behind the scenes. But as you can see, half of the bills in this package are, trying to update Michigan's antiquated statutes around lead, trying to bring Michigan up to, the new 3.5 deciliter blood lead level. I mean, just to try to bring us up to modern times, as well as expand some protections. So I'm really excited, for some actual tangible action.
Tina, you have spent a long time working on these in-home challenges, and there've been a lot of progress over the last year. Can you frame some of last several years, can you frame some of the major interventions that the government has already taken, like the lead and copper rule, and how that is impacting the overall situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest pivotal sentinel kind of moments is a shift from, dealing with lead and lead impacted families to looking at a prevention lens. Like, let's remove all sources of lead exposure so kids aren't impacted in the first place. So moving to a prevention mode has been, really, really important, and stop using, kids as canaries in a coal mine. And so that has allowed progress to be made as far as education outreach, looking at lead exposures in the community, targeting zip codes that are most at risk. There's been a lot of more coordination and weatherization and energy efficiency services to allow window and door replacements now. And so a lot of expenditures in making a home lead safe are doors and windows. And now that weatherization programs are allowing, replacements of doors and windows, that means that the lead dollars can potentially be stretched to more families and more homes. And so those are some, changes that come top of mind. To me, I know also that there is a much greater acceptance around universal lead testing than there has been in the past. And that will get to Representative Hood's point about we're not testing enough kids. And we're not testing enough kids because it's so hard, because physicians need to screen and need to ask these questions, and kids get left and looped. And, if we had a specific standard about testing at certain ages, that would make it easier. And so there's definitely been a lot of progress on both sides of the aisle to recognize that this is a Michigan issue, and that, resources need to be brought to bear.
And you talk about like the challenges of remediation, right? Like the laws that we put in place are one thing, but then there's the physical challenge of actually making these homes safe. What are the real barriers to in-home remediation that we're seeing?
I think universally it's a contractor shortage, just like we're seeing in home repairs and remodeling and building. It sits in lead abatement as well. It's a very challenging field. You have to have specific training. You have a lot on the line. You really want to do a good job for families. And we have a contractor shortage. And so even when there's been a child identified with an elevated blood lead level, the home has been, they take a look, they find out where those lead hazards are. Families are waiting months, maybe even a year, to be able to get a contractor to come in and make their homes lead safe. So that's a big stumbling block right now.
And so, Representative Hood, you have put together a really robust package of bills that has generated bipartisan support and interest. I'm going to throw a slide up that I believe your office provided that has an outline. Can you walk us through what this package is and what it's going to be able to accomplish?
Yeah, so as Tina mentioned, the package updates our public health laws so that we will, initially we began the package moving from 10 elevated blood lead level trigger levels from 10 deciliters down to 5. And in the midst of that, actually, just a couple of weeks after we submitted the bills, the CDC happily moved down the trigger level down to 3. So we are in the midst of creating substitute bills that would simply link the lead level trigger to the CDC's evolving rules. We anticipate the CDC will continue to move from the reference level of 3.5 down to 0 over time. So Michigan's laws will just kind of seamlessly move along with CDC guidelines moving forward. There is a bill requiring physicians to receive education to identify and treat lead poisoning in children as a part of their professional continuing education and licensing work. There are bills that would require coverage for lead screenings for children up to age 6 who are on Medicaid or enrolled in My Child. This is an intermediate step that the state can take. We hope to, in the next year or two, be prepared to roll out universal testing. And it's my understanding that public health departments and other stakeholders across the state are in conversations about that with DHHS. But there are a lot of kind of technical pieces that need to be worked out at the department level before we're able to lift up those bills. So in the meantime, we are focusing on the Medicaid and my child population.
You broke the package down into sort of like the keeping our kids safe here and then also improving paint safety. So there's like a balance, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the final chunks are focused on changing rules around renovation and rehab work. So we are better linked up with federal regulations as they have evolved over the last couple of years as well.
So we have a question in the chat related to this too from Rebecca Belenson, who's asking about proposals for workforce development programs that would help in this with the shortage of lead abatement contractors, certainly with the training work. Have you all been thinking about how to build that system?
Yeah, I think there has been some work around requiring lead paint skill sets among the workforce. And I have in the past had bills that would incentivize workers to get that training and help pay for the costs. I hope that we can continue forward with more of that work. And then in terms of workforce development, there are a myriad of initiatives underway to create clear pipelines into the trades, and our partners in the trade unions, for instance, the IBEW, the electrical workers, the carpenters and millwrights, et cetera, have amazing programs right now that are actually training people and paying them as they move through those workforce training programs. They have integrated lead education into those programs, and then we continue to build out the kind of post-training, post-journeyman components that the state is leading. We've done a lot in terms of investing in education, both for consumers and for the industry, the construction industry, to drive people into these trainings and into better awareness around, needing to get qualified people to do this type of work in your home, especially if you have young children or you're planning to have young children in that particular building.
Rachel, it is very unusual in this legislature to see the kind of bipartisan partnership that you've been able to develop here. And the slide here shows the leading bill sponsors and in these areas. Can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to develop that across the aisle partnership that might result in real reform?
Again, it is patient education and choosing some of the bills and designing a bill package that doesn't threaten Republican values. These are bills that everybody on both sides of the aisle can get behind, obviously. And I think as the legislature has gotten more educated on these issues, as they have understood how pervasive it is, thanks to folks in the environmental community who've been working on this for years, thanks to the interpersonal relationships that members who represent districts that have large amounts of lead, both of those things I think are at play in guiding us forward on these issues.
Congratulations to you on this. It is really, it's an impressive partnership and an outstanding package. We got to get it across the line though, right? So we get our first hearing. The thing that we need to have more of are citizens raising their voices in support of this work. Tina, you have been the leader of the Michigan Alliance for Lead Safe Homes for many years. pulling together advocates from all across the state. And we host an annual lead education day with that team, which helps to keep this issue on the forefront with the legislature. As the organizer, can you talk a little bit about how things have changed in the last 11 years and how this momentum, this movement around lead safe homes is growing, and what progress we've made and where we hope to go?
Yes. I mean, when we started 11 years ago with our first lead education day, there were a handful of us that went to policymakers, and we overwhelmingly heard, well, we banned lead in paint and we don't have lead in gas. It's gone. It's a problem. Mission accomplished. And so we pretty much had to start from ground zero, reminding people that lead is an element that doesn't disappear. It's not the solution to pollution is dilution. We need to really abate and take care of it. We needed to present facts and figures about the impact. We had to let members know that there were families in their district that were impacted and were on a wait list because there wasn't dollars to abate their home. And now when we go our last lead education days, we've had upwards of 100 participants. We have been able to reach out to, members on health policy, appropriations, even outside committees. We have, our MyLosh group has a pretty good statewide representation at this point. It's just night and day difference. Lawmakers are very receptive. When it's time to meet with them, they're like, oh, you guys are the lead people. Like, we're expected to come in the spring. Everyone has a little vial of sand on their desk that equates to the amount of material needed to contaminate 1,200 square feet. We have a visual representation we leave with members. They have them in their offices when we go. Yes, it's across the board, across the aisle. There's a big interest in this issue and a recognition that it's something we need to be working on.
When we think about the challenge of passage, how can MyLash and others engage in the advocacy work here?
Yeah, thank you. So we have a hearing next week, December 9th, the morning of Thursday, December 9th, in health policy with the chair, Representative Brana Kali. And we are hopeful that people can provide comments to Brana. And I believe my staff will likely pop some information into the chat so people can have that contact information. Yep, there's Tom. There we go. If your family has been impacted by lead, if you are part of an industry that's impacted by lead, we want to hear from you about your take on these bills and how the state might be able to help move us forward to address lead issues.
You provided a nice slide too, Representative, with key messages that people can take to their lawmakers here. Improving the lead poisoning detection, holding those at-risk facilities and homes accountable, updating the language so that we're all working from the same playbook. And then, of course, at the bottom line, we want everyone to be safe. What helps the most, Tina, what we've learned from the lead education day, though, is people's personal stories, right?
Yes, absolutely. A parent's personal story really resonates with policymakers. They picture themselves, their children, their grandchildren. It's really, really impactful. We've heard from members about how that changes their mind, how it really puts a personal face on an issue. I mean, we can come with facts and figures and say it costs $5,600 a year in medical care for a lead impacted child. And we can, but just having a parent there saying that, I had absolutely no idea there was lead in my home. It's invisible. It's tasteless. My child exhibited no symptoms. I don't want this to ever happen to another parent. Those stories are really impactful. And a shout out to ClearCorps, a shout out to Grand Rapids groups that are cultivating the parent voices and elevating parent stories and doing training and getting parents comfortable with talking with policymakers policymakers, because they're really the linchpin that humanizes this issue and helps make it a priority for policymakers.
Yeah, parents have a special way of being able to demonstrate how kids are slipping through the cracks of the system, which has a lot of holes in it, and a lot of places, where we need parents to be working cooperatively with public health and healthcare providers. There are a lot of barriers for parents who are busy, sometimes working multiple jobs and trying to get their kids to the doctors. It's not easy. It is really, really complex. And so to have those real life stories is so critical. And then I just want to say that legislators are people too. And I know, and I have in my own past been intimidated about the idea of talking to people who serve in Lansing, who have, work in these fancy offices and wear these fancy pins. But truly, the most powerful messages come from just everyday people who are impacted. And we too are parents. We are also grandparents. We understand that this is an issue, and we don't expect you to have a PhD to be able to testify. In fact, we don't even need you to have graduated from college, because those real life stories, those human connections are the things that motivate legislators forward.
So I hesitate to ask the prognosticating question, but how representative are you feeling about the likelihood that your bill package is going to get traction and advance?
I feel like there are several bills in this package that are going to move forward without hesitation. There are a couple where there are hiccups, and we're working on the substitutes that will help to neutralize some of the current concerns that have been brought up. And in particular, the physician education, we've heard a lot from, which is my bill, ironically. The physician education bill is one that we've heard a lot of concern from physicians on, and from the medical community, because we don't want to overwhelm our physicians with additional educational requirements in the midst of a crisis. So we are working on narrowing the population of physicians who would be targeted for this law. So focusing more on pediatricians and primary care physicians, who are kind of the front lines for most interactions with families. And we are also working on a test out opportunity. So a physician would be able to quickly test out of the requirement for further education. Because we do know, depending on where you do your residency, what kind of rounds you're doing, you may get a real life education in lead treatment during training as a physician. So we want to make sure those folks aren't burdened by this and can move through quickly.
Well, we're at the hour exactly. So, thank you so much for the insight, and very good luck with this package. Representative Rachel Hood of Grand Rapids and our own Tina Wall of the Michigan Environmental Council, I really appreciate you both taking time to share with our supporters how they can get involved in this really excellent and important legislative opportunity. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're such a great partner. Appreciate MEC so much. Keep up the good work.
And to all of you out there, thanks for coming back to Capital Connection. We'll see you the next time around.